Yes, hello and welcome to the Business of Property podcast. I'm Stuart.
And I'm Simon.
We've been finding, buying and growing income from property for over 20 years, and we talk every week about the reality of running our property businesses. As always, we would really appreciate it if you could just scroll down on your podcast player and hit the ratings button. It takes less than a second, and it would greatly help us. So please do that. As long as you're enjoying the show, of course, and we hope that you are, and that's why you're here. Today's episode, we are talking through the Hometrack UK House Price Index, and if it's something you would like to have a look at, please, again, go down to the show notes in your podcast player, or obviously, if you're looking on YouTube, we'll have that in the links. Because that will help you have a look at some of the graphs that we're talking through and give you hopefully a little bit more insights to the things that we're talking about. So please do that if you're in a position to do so. Simon, in terms of summary, do you want to kick us off in terms of what you've been looking at on the UK House Price Index?
Yeah, I think there's a whole collection of stats in here, obviously, and there's lots of different things that are quite interesting. We'll pick out a few as we go along. But of course, the headline one is price. Property prices are, according to Hometrack, down 0.5% year on year. And I think, particularly for me, that's interesting because it's a very small change, but it is in contrast to most of the other indexes and price reports that I've seen recently from sort of Halifax and Nationwide. They seem to be reporting very small but increases, and Hometrack have come in at a very small but decrease, which I think is different. Although that does break down quite regionally. Do you want to cover that a bit, Stuart?
Yeah, and let's get it out early because we like to do that. Yes, we're not going to get into the data. Quality of the different indexes and reports that we see. But the first thing I would say is, minus 0.5% in my world is negligible at best. So at the total level, there is no news. And I think I would just get that out nice and early so that we're clear. But as you say, Simon, the most important thing for us when we're looking at it is more regionally, because we know that the UK behaves in very, very different ways. Obviously Northern Ireland is, in a separate landmass to us. So, that could behave very differently. But when we look at the overall picture, and this would help if you've got a view of the Hometrack report where you've got an image of the UK, because what's very clear is the top half of the UK is green in terms of the annual increases, but the bottom half is more red, where we're seeing annual decreases. And just to explain that, so it's the 12 months to the end of January, comparing the previous year. So that is what it's looking at. And when we look at it, and we'll dig into this a little bit, but for me, it's basically from Nottingham down. So we've got East Midlands, East of England, London, South East, and the South West. Particularly where I invest, which I don't always see because it's a very static area, but all of that is red in terms of annual decreases. So that we know Southeast, but I find that quite interesting that it's quite stark at this stage.
Yeah, quite. I think it's so interesting that you can kind of draw a line in the middle of the country, and the further north you go, the better things have been, and the further south you go, the worse they've been. Although this is reporting a 0.8% fall in London. And that, I think, is actually slightly counter to anecdotal information that I've seen. So my in-laws have been selling their own home. And actually, they sold it last year. And they had some interest, but not crazy interest. And they ended up having to take a slightly lower offer than they were hoping for. And unfortunately, that sale, after many months and lots of frustration, did fall apart. But that meant, obviously, that they put it back on the market this year, and they had much more interest. They had 10 viewings booked within a week, and from those viewings, they had multiple interested parties, and those parties were actually bidding up the price, and they have now accepted an offer that was over their asking price rather than one that is under their asking price. So I think it's quite a big contrast from last year to this year, and maybe the stats haven't quite caught up. I don't know. We'll have to see, or maybe they just haven't recovered enough to be reflected in year-on-year figures. But something that is reflected in these numbers, which I think is also in that story, is that there's a lot more interest and a lot more activity in the market. There are more properties on the market. There are more people looking for properties and doing viewings and hopefully making offers as well. Now, I know, Stuart, you've got some properties on the market at the moment. Have you seen that shift at all?
Yeah. So as regular listeners will know, I have a property for sale in Croydon, which Greater London, and that's been on the market since September, and it's not going to budge. And it always reminds me that we can look at these figures at what I consider more of a macro level, a much bigger level, and talk about fluctuations. But in the property I've got, for example, there's a lot of micro things that are going on as well. There's a lot of activity happening in this very specific area that the flat's in. There's lots of other flats that have gone up recently. The flat itself is suffering a bit with issues which are not for this podcast. So we might have viewings, but people might not be interested just because we need to sort some stuff out in the flat, as well as a few things going on. So that flat has really not had any movement whatsoever and will be taken off the market shortly. For a number of reasons, but I have a property in the southwest which we put on the market early this year. It was one of my kind of things to do as soon as we got into the 2024, and within 2 weeks we'd had an offer, and within 2 weeks we'd accepted the offer, and it was very, very close to asking price. Now it's still going through at the moment, so in typical fashion, I'm not going to jinx it by talking about any specifics at this stage, because as we know in property, there's a long way to go. But what that showed me was I think we priced it well. I think we had a good agent, priced it very well. We talked through how we constructed the price. It matched my estimation of what I thought it would be. In fact, I think it's slightly higher than where I thought it was. So again, tells me
Hometrack suggests a 1.7% fall year on year in that area. Do you think that's reflected?
No, not in my property, because again we've had that property for around about 9 years, and that's grown in value. I would say it's grown in value by about 25%. So, roughly speaking, it's annualized at about 3% a year. If we don't take inflation into account, which we're not, because we're not an economics podcast, and we don't do that. We talk about our experience.
We like inflation. We don't like inflation. My apologies, but I think it's interesting to talk about inflation, but it's just so complicated. So we're not bringing it into today's discussion.
It's certainly not for my brain today. But the other thing I wanted to mention, because we've talked about the fact that nationally it's minus 0.5, and therefore in our minds negligible. So at the regional level, let's just do it quickly. So Scotland, 2.2% increase. Northern Ireland, let's not forget them, 4.3% increase. And that's the biggest increase we've seen. And again, anecdotally, I know a couple of people out there investing there that talked about it. It's quite a frothy market, has been. But then we come down to the Northeast, 0.6% increased. Northwest, 0.7% increased. And then Yorkshire and Humber, 0.3. So as you said at the beginning, the further we come down south, the more it drops. And then actually West Midlands, Wales, both increased 0.3%. So if we're saying that nationally minus 0.5 decrease is negligible, then surely we can say that those are probably about flat as well. But then East Midlands minus 0.8, East of England minus 2.1%, London, as you said, 0.8% drop, Southeast minus 1.9, and Southwest minus 1.7. So just to clarify that for those that are listening.
I don't quite know what's going on with the East of England. They're bucking the trend of being the bigger numbers the further away you go from the middle.
Yeah. But yeah, so I've been very happy. And also on the Hometrack report, it talks about the fact that there's a fifth more homes for sale than a year ago. So that itself, for me, is interesting, because very unsurprisingly, people still need to sell homes. And we've talked about this many times on the podcast before, because there's all sorts of reasons. And as a seller, you don't, unless you think, because again, thinking about us as investors and me selling, I wouldn't look at the Southwest and say, oh, minus 1.7%. I'll hold off selling my property for a bit, because even if I thought that was a direct calculation to make, I would do my back of a fag packet and say, well, this is what the agent and myself think the property's worth, less 2%. Yeah, I would move on, but I would never do that calculation. We'd do the market value, and if the market, we've talked about a lot of this in a lot of detail before. If the market value is something which I believe is acceptable, then we're selling, regardless of what we think is happening in the market. And I think what we're saying is, at the moment, not a lot in terms of price. It's okay. There's people selling properties. There's people buying properties, but we do need to be mindful.
Yeah, I mean, looking at the PATMA data that we have, you can also see sort of similar information or trends around the activity in the market. So median days on the market at the moment, so median time to sell a property in February, 79 days. So, and that's back around where it was sort of for most of the end of last year. It went up a bit around early January, but I think that's sort of lag from properties coming on at the end of last year and then them just sitting there during Christmas and the festive season and not much happening to them. So, I mean, it's spiked up into the 90-something days of properties being on the market. But yeah, we're back down to 79 at the moment. And also we can see price changes that are coming through in the market. So in February, only 15% of properties on the market actually saw a price reduction versus, I don't know, let's pick October last year. That wasn't actually the peak, but it was sort of a higher point. And in October, there were 22% of properties on the market seeing a price reduction. So yeah, I think there's more activity. People are seeing more things moving and happening and things. And that's reflecting in the statistics that we're seeing and in people not feeling that they need to reduce their prices quite so much. I think it's interesting to see, and generally a positive thing. I think something that might be a bit less positive for some views is the rental market at the moment. And we don't have any Hometrack data on this, but we've got some PATMA data, and we've got sort of our own anecdotal experiences as well. And in the PATMA data, what we're seeing there is that the time to rent, as in the days for a rental property to be on the market, is actually increasing a bit at the moment. And that would suggest that there is a less frothy rental market. This is data across the whole of England. I haven't got a regional breakdown. But that seems to contradict what I'm seeing personally in the property that I've recently rented. I put it on the market. I had over 50 inquiries in approximately a week, a little bit over a week. And I then arranged about 10 viewings. I think it's just under 9, maybe, I think. And only one of the people who came to view did not then put an offer in. But one thing I did see that was different this year versus last year when I rented the same property is nobody decided to bid over the asking rent. Everybody said, yes, we'd like to take the property. We're very interested. It would be lovely. And we'd like to pay the full asking rent. Whereas last year, there were multiple people coming back saying, yes, we're really interested in the property. We'd really like to take it. And we will offer you over the asking rent in order to secure it. So maybe there's just a very, very slight slowing in the rental market. And I suggested this might be good because I think the rental market is probably too busy, a bit too demanding at the moment. It's causing problems for people who are trying to find homes, rental homes. So I don't know. What do you think on that, Stuart? Are you seeing very high demand for your rooms at the moment? And do you think the rental market is in a healthy position at the minute?
In terms of my portfolio, I would say that we are in a good position and we're mostly occupied. I think we've just got the standard the standard cycle of people leaving rooms. So I haven't noticed anything different. We have also increased the prices in line with inflation and market rates, and so far that doesn't seem to have impacted it. So again, this is in the southwest, so we haven't seen any changes at any other levels. I wouldn't know. In terms of, we've had long-term tenants, and that's the thing in buy-to-let. In our properties, we've got long-term tenants that have been there, more than a couple of years. So it's not something we get involved in. But whenever we've looked at market prices, and we didn't, like most people, for a couple of years we just left it. But whenever we've had to increase those prices, they've accepted them without without too much fuss, and because we explained to them and we've looked at the market rates. So I think it comes back to, without skiing off in this direction, but it comes back to we know it's really about demand and supply, isn't it? And I think if at the end of the day we know that there is a requirement for housing and homes, and if you've got the right sort of supply, that will be taken. But the market will always mostly tell you when you've mispriced something.
Yeah, I think that there is still really high demand for rentals. I mean, at least in this area, in my experience, for homes rather than rooms and things. I mean, this is obviously lots of variation out there in the market, but I think generally demand is still very high. But I think we have just sort of reached a point where rents have gone up and up and up, and people just can't afford higher rents anymore. So I don't think they can start bidding up to try and win properties with higher rents. I think the market is at its limit, at least in this area. Do you feel that at all, or do you think there is still affordability scope or space or whatever in your rental market?
Well, I think you just said it there at the end. And again, it's what we've just said. It's about demand and supply, and also if we're renting, so we rent rooms between £400 to £750. I mean, the maximum room rate would always be getting close to a one-bed flat, possibly two, but definitely a one-bed flat. And there are some people that would prefer shared housing. However, there will always be that point at which someone just says, no, we can't. We're not going to pay that, and we'd have to readjust. So as I say, it's we have seen, if we're providing the right products, if we've got good quality rooms, en suites, and the property is in good condition, people will be happy to pay the premium rates, but to a limit. If we push it past, they'll just go off and go find a one bed flat or find a partner to go and get a one bed flat.
Yeah, just speaking of room rates reminds me, I saw some HMO rooms, and I mean they were intended to be proper luxury rooms, but they were local to us in Red Hill, and they were over £1,000 a month for a room in a shared house. And that just struck me as crazy high. And you're right, you can find one bedroom flats for that in this area, so and possibly even less than that if you hunt a bit. So yeah, it is possible that HMO room rates can go really quite high.
And just coming back to the house price index, in terms of the city summary, what I found really interesting. So the city index takes the 20 cities and sorts them in terms of their year on year increase or decrease. So essentially, at the top of the list, we've got the top 20, and we've got Belfast at the top with a year-on-year increase of 4.5% and an average property price of 169,700, all the way down to Southampton, which is an average price of 255,100, which has decreased by minus 2.5%. But what really interests me is that Portsmouth, Bournemouth, and Southampton are the bottom three, and they're all on the south coast, which is not far from where we are. So, South Coast, what is going on there? Although Bournemouth, interestingly, their average price is 328,500. Now, this is where data can play tricks with us, because in terms of the mix of property types in Bournemouth must be slightly different. I'm thinking retirement areas and that kind of stuff. But Bournemouth's average property price is 328,000 and a bit. Southampton 255,000, and they're just down the road. So £130,000 about £80,000 difference if you're willing to drive down the road, but you'll still be on the coast.
Yeah, it is quite stark, isn't it, between those? And we talk about different percentages going up or down in different markets and things, but it is also important to say that the actual numbers of pounds we're dealing with varies a lot. So, for example, you've got Bournemouth on the south coast, 328,000 is an average property price there, whereas Aberdeen, so up on the north coast, you're looking at 136,000. So it's a huge difference in actual pounds. So these percentage swings will also be much more in terms of pounds on the south than they will be in the north. So yes, statistics and possibly some lies in there somewhere.
Yeah, I'm sure there is many, many lies. Hopefully not from our mouths. And as always, just to wrap up this podcast, just obviously this is Simon and myself talking through just our thoughts on these things as we go. Nothing we say should ever be constituted as financial advice. We do give advice time to time, but definitely not financial. Speak to your relevant professional for that. Hope you've enjoyed the episode. If you have, do leave us a rating, please, and a review if you feel that way inclined. Other than that, we'll see you in the next episode.